Okay, we're back, and I hope you've got your research question in that PowerPoint. Now it's time for us to talk a little bit about primary research. Now, I want you to remember that primary research is you looking directly at your topic. And remember that your topic is the rhetorical patterns that people are using to make arguments about this policy, not the policy itself. Remember, it's not my job to judge whether or not the Matsu district was okay or right or wrong to ban books. My topic is to say, what arguments did people make for, against, or perhaps some middle ground with regard to banning books? And what can that teach me about this larger problem of banning books? So I need to know, what are the people who are involved saying about this topic? How are the various camps lining up to make their arguments and to try to make their arguments persuasive? Now, this is where things get tough because you want to remember that there may be more than two positions. Complex topics are not easily reduced to pros and cons, even though that tends to be what we see on the news. Simple pros and cons make for better sound bites. And so the enormous complexity of most of our viewpoints and of most of the conversations we have in public often gets obscured. It often gets boiled down to easy pros and cons, when in fact, a lot of people involved may have more complex viewpoints. Now, as we go to begin looking at those complex viewpoints, Noah Stout and Connor Carey in the Q&A had a really interesting conversation about the question of credible or not credible. So when we're talking about primary sources, what I want to highlight for you is that our typical notions of credible or not credible need to become more complex. Instead of asking whether a source is credible or not credible, we need to ask the following questions. Is this source a good representative of a voice in the conversation? Does the source provide me with valuable insight into some element of the argument? What are the biases of this source? Why does the source hold these biases? And if the source is not quote unquote credible in a typical sense, why might some people find it persuasive? Now, just as an example, let's go back out to Twitter. Now, we don't normally think of Twitter as particularly credible, right? But look at what happens when we look at this tweet from the Frontiersman News. First of all, the Frontiersman News is related to this school district. We see that it's been around for a while, and we see that it's working to present itself in an unbiased fashion, simply reporting on data that it could have gotten from this school board document. Now, we might think of this newspaper as traditionally credible if what it's doing is simply trying to present the facts in that objective way that we have come over time to value from the news. But look at this person here, Katie Parrott. Is Katie Parrott, who thinks that this is nuts, particularly credible? Well, we don't know who she is. We know she tells us she's from Alaska. And oh, look at this. She tells us that she's an administrator. Is she a school administrator? Well, in that case, now she's getting a little bit more interesting. Now, you might not know who Danielle Allen is, but I do. I know that Danielle Allen is an educator from Harvard who follows this person. So that's interesting again as well. Katie Parrott is here for all things Alaska legislature, Alaska, and your dad jokes. That makes her slightly less credible. So let's go back to our questions. Is she a voice in the conversation? Well, if we scroll down, we get a yikes. We get a God forbid we let our children learn about rape. We get a lot of people who feel like this was a bad choice. So she is representative of a voice in the conversation. And even if she's not traditionally credible, are there reasons that people might find her persuasive? Well, the fact that she appears to be a school administrator and the fact that she appears to think what I think might make me find her take that this is nuts persuasive. Again, if we scroll down, we're going to see that a lot of the things people are saying are about the area, right? So somebody said, let's face it, this is the valley. Them poor oppressed residents, right? So what we're seeing here is that people are complaining about the region that actually did this banning. Are these voices credible? Not in the traditional way, but might some people find them persuasive? I would contend they might. And part of the task of understanding the rhetoric is to figure out why people might find them persuasive. So, primary research then is not about credibility in that more traditional way. But in this case, it's about understanding what might be persuasive in that data that we find about the arguments people are making. So what kinds of sources might be primary sources? Well, we've just seen a few. We might find that newspaper articles and news reports are primary sources. Blog posts might be primary sources. Social media posts, government documents, or the websites of organizations. Let's go back over here. We can see, let's see if this will open up for us. Here is a government document from the school board itself that talks about why they would make this choice, what choices they're making, and why they might have chosen to do it. This is a primary source. All of these tweets are primary sources. Anything that we might find in other newspapers, let's see if I can find it. I think I've clicked away, but if we go back, here we go. Anything that we might find from the school board in this New York Times article, such as this quote from someone named Ms. Welton, could be used as a primary source. Okay. So this is going to be the next place that I'm going to ask you to stop. I'm going to ask you to find some time identifying at least 3, but no more than 9 primary source documents for your annotated bibliography. Now, I'm going to ask you to go review the Scaffold 3 guidance for the types of sources that you need to find. And you can feel free to ask me if you're uncertain about what category a particular source fits into. And let's take a moment to go look at that. So we're going to go into my computer here and we're going to find the Scaffold 3 annotated bibliography instructions. And as they open, we're going to see that I am asking you to find a mix of news or popular media sources. So that can be blogs and online articles, books, scholarly articles, and government, organizational, or business sources. For most of you, your primary sources are going to fit in the news and or popular media and the government, organizational, or business sources genres. Okay? I am going to add a chart to the Module 5 space. And Zach Benson mentioned that he keeps track of his sources for an annotated bibliography in an Excel file. This chart will be much like an Excel file, and it's going to help you keep track not only of your sources and those arguments, but also of the rhetoric that you're seeing play out in those sources. When you finish with that, I'm going to ask you to come back for the third video where we're going to talk a little bit about creating annotated bibliography entries.